Everyone ignored the trap set by the billionaire's fiancée, a danger so well hidden that no one questioned her sweet behavior, her perfect smile, or the way she slowly took control of the family's life. People assumed she was kind, loyal, and loving, and even the billionaire himself believed he had finally found someone he could trust. Friends, employees, and even close relatives looked at her and saw nothing suspicious. But behind all the charm, there was a plan growing quietly, a plan that no one noticed in time. No one except for the maid, who happened to catch a small detail that didn't fit, a detail so simple that it could have been ignored. Yet that tiny clue opened the door to a truth far darker than anyone expected, revealing the terrifying trap that everyone else failed to see. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Richard Coleman woke up every day feeling the pressure of everything he needed to handle. Even though he lived in a large and comfortable mansion, he could not enjoy it because his mind was always full of meetings, deadlines, and demands from shareholders. He tried to organize his thoughts, but there was always another responsibility waiting for him. Little by little, he felt more tired and distant from the people around him. Emily, his wife, noticed this change and tried to keep the house stable, but the tension between them made everything harder. Richard knew something was wrong, yet he did not know how to fix it. Small tasks began to feel heavy, and he questioned how long he could continue living like that. Every day the house felt quieter, not in a peaceful way, but in a strained and uncomfortable one. Richard felt that he was losing control of his personal life while trying to hold everything together at work. This made him even more stressed, and he reacted without thinking. He tried to keep his routine normal, but it felt empty. His emotions stayed locked inside, and each day became a repetition of pressure and frustration that he did not know how to escape. Emily tried her best to prevent the problems from getting worse inside the house. She attempted to talk to Richard whenever she found an opportunity, but their conversations often ended in misunderstandings. She wanted the home to be a place where everyone could feel calm, but living with constant tension made that goal difficult. Emily saw how Richard was becoming more impatient and more distant, and she felt powerless to help him. Every time she approached him gently, he reacted in a way that created another argument. Their words became sharp, even when they did not mean for them to be. Emily missed the days when they could solve problems together without everything turning into a conflict. Now their relationship felt fragile, as if any mistake could cause another disagreement. She tried to hide her frustration from the twins and from Grace, but it was hard to pretend that everything was fine. Still, she continued managing the household because she did not want the environment to become even heavier. Inside, she felt lonely, standing next to a husband who seemed further away each day, unsure of how to bring back the connection they once had. Noah and Ethan were young, but they clearly sensed something was wrong. They watched their parents' behavior and felt the tension in the air, even when no one said anything directly to them. The twins talked quietly with each other about how things had changed at home. They noticed the frequent arguments, even when Richard and Emily tried to keep their voices low. They wondered if they had done something wrong or if their parents were upset with them, even though no one had suggested that. Sometimes they stayed in their rooms longer than usual to avoid hearing another tense discussion. They also realized that Grace was trying her best to keep things normal, but even her efforts could not remove the heavy feeling in the house. The twins missed simple moments with their parents, moments that used to happen easily. Now every family meal felt awkward, with everyone pretending everything was fine. They also noticed how Richard rarely showed emotion or spent time with them, always busy or distracted. This made the house feel even colder. Noah and Ethan learned to carry the silence, even though it made them uneasy. They wanted things to go back to how they were, but did not know how that could happen. Grace Miller worked hard to keep the household stable, even though she could see the tension worsening each day. She had been with the family long enough to recognize when something was deeply wrong. She kept the house clean, meals prepared, and the routine organized, hoping this would make things a little easier. Grace tried not to speak too much when Richard looked stressed, and she offered quiet support to Emily whenever possible. She worried about the twins, knowing that children were sensitive to changes around them. Grace gave them small tasks or activities to distract them from the tension in the house. She hoped to create small moments of normalcy for them. Still, she understood that no amount of organization would fix the family's underlying problems. Grace noticed how Richard moved through the house quickly, speaking as little as possible, as if he was trapped in his own thoughts. She watched Emily struggle to stay composed while dealing with the growing distance in her marriage. Grace wished she could do more, but she also knew that the situation was beyond what her role allowed. Every day, she hoped the family would find balance again, even though the signs suggested it was becoming harder. Richard felt increasingly isolated, even though he lived surrounded by people. The constant pressure from his professional responsibilities drained him completely, leaving little space for patience or emotion. He could not separate work stress from his home life, and the two worlds started to mix in uncomfortable ways. He recognized that he was becoming distant from Emily and the twins, but he lacked the energy to address the problem. He often made impulsive decisions without considering the consequences, simply trying to relieve the internal pressure. However, these actions usually led to more arguments, especially with Emily. He did not want to hurt her, but his reactions came out harsh and unplanned. Over time, he began avoiding deeper conversations, afraid that he would lose his temper or say something he would regret. This only increased the distance between him and his family. Richard felt trapped in a pattern where every solution created another problem. He saw the disappointment in Emily's eyes, and he felt the silence from the twins, but he did not know how to break the cycle. Instead, he focused on work even more, telling himself it was necessary, but also knowing it pushed his family further away. Emily also realized their relationship was reaching a breaking point. The arguments had become so frequent that she no longer knew how to start a calm conversation with Richard. Every attempt seemed to lead to more tension. She felt exhausted, discouraged, and unsure of how to move forward. The house no longer felt warm or welcoming. Emily feared that their problems had grown too large to repair. She knew Richard was under enormous pressure, but she also saw that the way he handled it was damaging their family. She did not want to give up, but she felt that he was not willing to face the issues with her. The silence between them became as heavy as the arguments, making her feel as if they were living separate lives under the same roof. Still, she pushed herself to maintain stability for the twins and to keep the household functioning. Every day, she carried a growing fear that their marriage was approaching an irreversible point. She wanted things to improve, but she no longer knew what steps to take, and the lack of answers left her feeling stuck, hoping that something would change before it was too late. Richard finally reached a point where he felt he could not continue living the same way. After months of constant arguments and tension inside the house, he decided to tell Emily that he wanted a divorce. He said he could no longer handle their daily interactions and that the relationship had become impossible to maintain. Saying this was not easy for him, but he believed it was something he had to do. Emily was shocked when she heard his decision. She felt a deep pain, because even with all the problems, she had hoped that things might improve someday. For a moment, she did not know how to respond, but she tried to stay calm. Richard's words made her realize that the situation had reached a point where holding on would only bring more hurt. Even though she was devastated, she tried not to show anger or desperation. She understood that forcing the marriage to continue would not bring happiness to either of them. Richard believed that ending the marriage would help him regain control of his life, even if it meant creating distance from the family he once tried to protect. With his decision made, Both of them faced a difficult new beginning. Emily accepted the divorce, even though it caused her great pain. She did not ask for money or assets, and she made it clear that she did not want anything from Richard's fortune. She wanted to start fresh on her own terms, without depending on him. She chose to move to a small, simple house in a quiet area on the outskirts of the city. It was nothing like the mansion she had lived in for years, but she felt that a new environment would help her rebuild her life. Packing her things was an emotional process. Every object reminded her of the life she had tried to protect and the moments she had hoped would last. Still, she kept her posture and dignity, choosing not to argue about material possessions. She wanted peace more than comfort. Moving into the small house felt strange at first, but Emily knew she needed a place where she could breathe again. She understood that the mansion represented a version of her life that no longer existed. The new home was the first step toward taking control of her own path, even if that path was painful in the beginning. She hoped that in time she would find strength again. Noah and Ethan were deeply affected by their parents' separation. Even though they had witnessed many arguments, they still struggled to understand why their family was breaking apart. When Emily moved out, the boys felt sadness and confusion, not knowing how to deal with the sudden change. They missed the idea of a home where both parents were present, even though that home had become tense and difficult. Grace, who had always been close to them, became an important source of comfort. She listened to them when they needed to talk and stayed by their side when they felt overwhelmed. She treated them with kindness and patience, helping them understand that none of what happened was their fault. The twins often looked for her because she made them feel safe. Grace continued to take care of them with dedication, even though the house felt different without Emily. She tried her best to keep their routine stable, understanding that children needed structure during confusing times. Noah and Ethan relied on her support more than ever, and her presence helped them adjust to the emotional changes happening around them. Even with sadness, they felt a little less alone because she remained with them. Richard tried to focus entirely on his work after the divorce. He believed that putting all his attention into his business would help him avoid emotional conflict. He convinced himself that distance from his family would make things easier and allow him to find clarity. He began spending more time in meetings, on calls, and dealing with business decisions. Work became a way to distract himself from the guilt and sadness that he did not want to face directly. He told himself that he was doing the right thing, but deep down he avoided thinking too much about Emily moving out or the twins struggling with the new arrangement. He avoided emotional conversations and focused only on tasks that made him feel productive. His schedule became even more intense, leaving almost no time for personal reflection. Richard believed that if he filled every hour with responsibilities, he would not have to confront the discomfort of his choices. The idea of creating emotional distance made sense to him at the time, even if it caused more tension with the people around him. He wanted to believe that this new routine would fix the dissatisfaction he had felt for so long, but he did not realize how much he was closing himself off. Meanwhile, Emily began building a new routine in her small home. The house was simpler and much smaller than the one she had lived in for years, but she embraced it as part of her new life. At first, the silence felt strange, because she was used to the constant movement of the mansion. Still, she slowly started creating a schedule for herself, organizing her days and finding new ways to fill her time. She focused on small tasks that gave her a sense of control, such as arranging the rooms, planning her meals, and adjusting to the new environment. Even though she felt lonely, she also felt relieved to be away from the arguments and pressure that filled her days before. She looked at this change as a chance to rebuild her self-esteem and recover parts of herself that she had lost over the years. Emily reminded herself that happiness did not depend on luxury or wealth, but on peace of mind. She accepted that the road ahead would be difficult, but she also believed it could lead to a calmer life. Each day, she took small steps towards stability, hoping that time would help her heal. Though still struggling emotionally, Emily viewed her new situation as an opportunity. She knew she could not change the past, but she could choose how to move forward. She wanted to grow stronger and more confident, and she tried to focus on personal progress rather than sadness. She spent time reflecting on her experiences, understanding how much the constant conflict had affected her. She realized that living away from the chaos of the marriage might help her regain her inner peace. The responsibility of being on her own was intimidating, yet she welcomed the challenge. She wanted to prove to herself that she could stand independently without relying on Richard or the lifestyle they once shared. As she continued shaping her new routine, she found comfort in the idea that change, even painful change, could lead to growth. Emily hoped that eventually she would feel whole again, and that Noah and Ethan would see her strength. She remained determined to create a stable life, one built on calmness rather than conflict. With each passing day, she felt a little more prepared to face her new reality and more confident that she had made the right choice. Richard met Meghan Hart during a business event that he attended shortly after trying to rebuild his life. The event was formal and filled with entrepreneurs, executives, and investors, and he expected it to be just another night of conversations focused on work. However, when he was introduced to Meghan, his attention shifted quickly. She was confident, well-spoken, and carried herself in a way that made people notice her. Meghan showed interest in what Richard said, and she listened carefully whenever he talked about business or personal experiences. She complimented him often, calling him intelligent and dedicated, and these comments affected him more than he expected. He had been feeling empty after the divorce, and her attention made him feel valued again. Their conversation flowed easily, and it surprised him how fast he felt a connection. He believed she understood him in a way that others around him did not. For the first time in a long while, he felt that someone appreciated him without judging his choices or the chaos he had recently experienced. By the end of the event, Richard was convinced that meeting her was more than a coincidence, and he left thinking about her long after the night was over. As the days passed, Richard continued communicating with Meghan. She always responded quickly and made sure he felt heard. She asked about his meetings, his projects, and even about his personal routine. Every time they met or talked, she found a way to praise something he did. She made him feel important, and he began to depend on that feeling. After the difficulties he had gone through with the divorce, Meghan's interest felt like a relief. She told him she admired his determination and the way he managed his company. Richard interpreted her words as genuine admiration. He believed she saw the best in him during a time when he felt exposed and uncertain. This made him think she could help him recover the confidence he had lost. He slowly started including her in parts of his routine. He invited her to dinners, shared details about his work, and talked about his past with her. He believed that Meghan could fill the emotional space left open after the end of his marriage. The more she stayed close to him, the more he imagined she might become a stable part of his life, offering comfort where he felt vulnerable. Richard eventually decided it was time for his children to meet Meghan. He hoped that Noah and Ethan would accept her the same way he had. He imagined that they might see her as someone who could bring positive energy to the family. However, when he introduced her to them, the reaction was not what he expected. Noah and Ethan behaved politely, but distant. They barely spoke, and when they did, their answers were short and cautious. They watched Meghan closely, unsure of how to act around her. Richard noticed their cold behavior, but thought it was only because they were still adjusting to the divorce. He believed they needed time, and that they would warm up to her eventually. Meghan tried to interact with them, asking simple questions and trying to appear friendly, but the boys remained uncomfortable. They felt confused, seeing their father with someone new so soon after the separation. They did not trust the sudden change and did not understand why their father seemed so attached to Megan already. For them, it felt strange and almost forced, and they could not hide how uneasy they were. Their reaction created tension that Richard did not want to acknowledge. Grace observed everything quietly. She had known Richard and the children for a long time, and she understood their behavior well. As she watched Megan interact with the boys, she noticed a certain controlled tone in Megan's actions. Megan smiled often and seemed kind, but something about her behavior felt planned, as if she measured her words carefully. Grace did not say anything out loud because she knew it was not her place to judge Richard's personal choices. Still, she could not ignore the details she picked up, the way Megan spoke only when it benefited her, how she observed the house with particular interest, and how she reacted when things did not go exactly her way. Grace remained respectful, but she kept her thoughts to herself. She continued caring for Noah and Ethan, trying to make them feel safe despite the changes happening around them. When they appeared uncomfortable after Megan's visits, Grace stayed close to them, giving them quiet support. Even without speaking her concerns, she stayed aware of the situation. She did not trust Megan completely, but she decided to wait and observe instead of making assumptions. She hoped Richard would remain careful about who he allowed into the family's life. Even with the children's cold reaction and Grace's silence, Richard only grew more attached to Megan. He believed she truly cared about him, and he felt encouraged by the way she always supported his decisions. He ignored the discomfort of the twins, thinking it was a normal phase that would pass. He also did not notice Grace's quiet observations because he was too focused on the positive attention Megan gave him. He invited her more often into his day-to-day life. She joined him during meals, accompanied him to some events, and spent time with him at home. Richard felt lighter with her near. Convinced that she represented a new chapter, he saw her interest as sincere affection, something he had been missing since before the divorce. He convinced himself that she understood his struggles and wanted to help him move forward. The more he believed this, the more space he gave her in his routine. He saw her as someone who brought comfort, not realizing that others around him had concerns he chose not to acknowledge. For him, Megan was proof that he could be happy again, and he focused on that idea with increasing certainty. Richard continued moving forward with confidence, thinking that the connection he had found with Megan was exactly what he needed. He felt hopeful in a way he had not felt for months. He believed she was sincere and that she wanted to be part of his life for the right reasons. He held on to this belief strongly. He imagined that her presence could help him rebuild parts of himself that had been damaged during the divorce. Even if Noah and Ethan did not accept her yet, he thought they would eventually understand. He told himself that children sometimes resist change, but adapt with time. As for Grace, he assumed she respected his choices, and he did not question what she might be thinking. With these thoughts guiding him, he kept Megan close and continued sharing more of his world with her. He was certain that she represented a chance for new emotional stability. He believed she could help him create a future that felt less painful. With this hope, he ignored doubts and trusted the connection he felt. Richard saw Megan as the beginning of something better, convinced that she brought meaning to his life when he needed it the most. With time, Megan began visiting the mansion every day. At first, Richard thought this was a sign that she cared about him and wanted to be part of his life, so he did not question it. Megan started walking through the house as if she already belonged there. She paid attention to every detail, noticing how things were cleaned, how objects were placed, and how the daily routine worked. She made comments about small things she thought should change, even when no one asked for her opinion. She said these suggestions were only meant to help, insisting that she wanted the best for Richard. She encouraged him to reconsider old habits that he had followed for years, telling him they were outdated or unnecessary. Richard, tired from work and overwhelmed by responsibilities, accepted these comments without thinking much about them. He believed that Megan was showing care, not realizing how her behavior was slowly influencing his home more than he intended. Megan used every opportunity to show that she knew what was best, and she repeated this idea often. Her presence in the mansion became normal, and Richard assumed everything was fine, unaware of how much the environment around him was changing because of her constant involvement. As Megan's visits became part of the daily routine, she started acting in a way that made her seem responsible for how the house should function. She spoke confidently and corrected things that did not match her preferences. Sometimes she rearranged objects, adjusted schedules, or questioned how tasks were done. She always justified her actions by saying that she wanted Richard to have a better life. When she saw something she did not like, she pointed it out immediately and expected others to follow her instructions. Richard rarely noticed how demanding she sounded because he was usually distracted with work. He spent long hours on phone calls, in meetings, or preparing documents, which left Megan free to influence the house without interruption. She repeated the idea that Richard needed changes, and he believed she was simply helping. The more she insisted, the more she acted as if she had authority over the household. She made it clear that her opinions should be considered important, and she did not hesitate to express dissatisfaction when something was not done her way. Slowly, her presence shifted from supportive to dominant, but Richard was too occupied to realize this change. Grace watched these changes quietly. She had always paid attention to the house and to the people living in it, and now she saw how Megan tried to control things that had never been a problem before. Grace noticed Megan's tone, the way she spoke when Richard was present, and the different way she behaved when he was not. When they were alone, Megan's words were shorter and sharper. She acted impatient, especially with Noah and Ethan. Grace saw how Megan's expression changed when she had to interact with the twins without Richard around. Their presence seemed to annoy her, even though she tried to hide it when Richard entered the room. Grace kept her observations to herself, not wanting to create conflict. She continued working as usual, but she paid close attention to Megan's behavior. She could tell that something was wrong, yet she also knew she had no right to interfere in Richard's personal choices. Still, she understood that the environment in the mansion was shifting in a way that made the children uncomfortable. She tried to stay calm and balanced, doing her best to keep the house stable despite the tension slowly forming around them. Noah and Ethan felt increasingly uncomfortable with Megan's constant presence. They did not trust her and avoided interacting with her as much as possible. When she entered a room, they often stayed quiet or walked away, not wanting to be involved in her attempts to control everything. They felt judged by her, even during small moments. Megan sometimes commented on their behavior, their routines, or the way they did simple tasks. Her tone made them feel as though they were doing things wrong, even though she had no real reason to criticize them. The boys sensed that she did not like spending time alone with them. When Megan was left alone with the twins, her attitude shifted. She sounded irritated, impatient, or uninterested. This made Noah and Ethan even more distant. They sought comfort in Grace, who always made them feel safe and understood. Spending time with her helped them cope with the negative atmosphere that Megan brought into the mansion. The twins stayed close to Grace whenever they could, because she was the only person who made the house feel normal. They hoped Richard would notice their discomfort, but he seemed too busy to realize how difficult things were becoming for them. Richard remained unaware of the growing tension inside his own home. His focus stayed on his work, and he spent most of his time dealing with business matters. When he came home, he was tired and distracted, not paying attention to the small details happening around him. Megan took advantage of these moments, presenting herself as supportive and helpful whenever he appeared stressed. She spoke softly, offered suggestions, and positioned herself as the one person who understood him. Richard appreciated this attention, assuming Megan was simply being caring. Because of this, he did not notice the discomfort in the children's behavior or the quiet concern in Grace's expression. He saw Megan's involvement as a positive influence and believed she was helping him stabilize his life. He did not realize that her attitude toward the house and the twins was different when he was not around. Richard trusted her intentions completely, and this made him blind to the tension growing inside the mansion. He continued moving through his routine without questioning the changes that Megan brought into the family's daily life. As time passed, Megan made sure her presence felt essential. She behaved as if the mansion needed her to function well, and as if Richard depended on her guidance. She replaced calm suggestions with firm opinions and made herself appear important in every decision. She repeated that she wanted the best for Richard, using this idea to justify her constant involvement. She tried to take space in every aspect of his life, from small routines to personal matters. Her presence became unavoidable, and she acted as though she belonged in the center of everything. Richard accepted this without realizing how much control she was claiming. Megan used every opportunity to remind him that she was there to help, making herself appear irreplaceable. She created an environment where her authority seemed natural, even though nothing in the house had ever required her intervention. Grace and the twins felt her influence growing stronger, but they remained silent, each dealing with the tension in their own way. Megan, confident in her position, continued expanding her role, convinced that she could shape the family according to her own intentions. Megan began creating accusations against Grace in a slow but constant manner. She first mentioned small things, saying that Grace had forgotten simple tasks or made unnecessary mistakes. She made these comments while acting worried, as if her only intention was to help Richard notice something important. Soon, these small accusations grew into more serious claims. Megan said that Grace was causing problems inside the house on purpose, and she repeated these ideas whenever she had the chance. She also claimed that Grace treated Noah and Ethan in an inappropriate way, even though she never showed clear evidence. Megan spoke in a confident tone that made her words sound believable. Richard was surprised by these accusations because he had trusted Grace for years, but Megan insisted that she was trying to protect him and the children. She told him that Grace's behavior was damaging the routine of the house, making it harder for everyone to live peacefully. Each time Richard tried to question her, Megan repeated her concerns with more emotion, convincing him to pay attention to things he had never worried about before. Slowly, Richard began to wonder if he had overlooked something important without realizing it. As Megan continued, she created situations that made her accusations appear more realistic. Sometimes she pointed out simple misunderstandings and presented them as signs of Grace's supposed incompetence. Other times, she reacted strongly to minor issues, making them seem more serious than they were. Whenever Richard hesitated or tried to defend Grace, Megan insisted that she was only trying to help him see the truth. Her repetition made it difficult for him to ignore her claims. Grace, unaware of the full extent of these accusations, noticed that Richard had begun acting differently toward her. His questions felt more direct, and his tone sounded more suspicious than before. Grace answered everything honestly, but she felt confused about why he suddenly doubted her work. She sensed that something was changing, but she did not understand the source of the tension. Megan took advantage of every small moment that could support her accusations. She made sure Richard noticed anything that looked out of place, even if it had nothing to do with Grace. The more she insisted, the more Richard questioned his own judgment. Her persistent comments slowly weakened his trust, even though Grace had done nothing wrong. Noah and Ethan quickly realized that the situation was unfair. They trusted Grace completely and could not accept the accusations Megan made against her. The twins tried to tell Richard that Grace would never harm them or act poorly. They explained that she always treated them with kindness, patience, and respect. They spoke with sincerity, hoping that their father would believe them. However, Richard was torn. He wanted to trust his children, but Megan's constant complaints had made him uncertain. The boys insisted that Megan was wrong, but their words did not have the same force as Megan's repeated claims. They felt helpless as they watched their father become more distant from the truth. Every time they tried to defend Grace, Megan dismissed their comments by saying they were too young to understand what was happening. This made the twins even more frustrated. They felt ignored and trapped in a situation they could not fix. To them, it was clear that Grace was being targeted unfairly, but they did not know how to make Richard see it. The tension in the house grew stronger, and the boys became more worried about what Megan might do next. Richard found himself caught between exhaustion and confusion. He wanted peace inside his home, but the constant complaints overwhelmed him. Megan spoke with urgency, repeating her accusations with increasing pressure. She insisted that dismissing Grace would solve the problems she described. Richard tried to stay calm, but he felt emotionally drained. He remembered how stable the house had been before, but Megan's constant criticisms made him question his judgment. He wondered whether he had become too distracted with work to notice issues happening around him. The more tired he felt, the more he relied on Megan's opinions, thinking she was trying to protect the family. Grace's sadness and the boys' frustration made him uncomfortable, yet Megan always had a response that explained every doubt. She framed her accusations in a way that made disagreement seem irresponsible. Over time, Richard's resistance weakened. He could no longer separate the truth from Megan's claims. Feeling overwhelmed and uncertain, he began to believe that dismissing Grace might be the only way to restore calm inside the house. He reached this conclusion not because he trusted Megan completely, but because he was too tired to keep questioning her version of events. The moment Richard decided to dismiss Grace was heavy for everyone involved. He called her to talk, trying to keep his tone neutral, but his confusion showed through. Grace listened carefully, shocked as he repeated the accusations Megan had made. She tried to explain that she had never acted in any harmful way, especially toward Noah and Ethan. She reminded him of her years of work and loyalty. But Richard, worn down by emotional pressure, could not accept her defense. He believed Megan's version, thinking that removing Grace would end the ongoing tension. Grace felt a deep sense of injustice. She knew she had done nothing wrong, yet she could not change Richard's mind. Noah and Ethan felt heartbroken when they heard the news. They tried once again to defend her, but it was too late. Their father had already made his decision. Grace prepared to leave the mansion with sadness, not understanding how her work and her intentions had been so easily questioned. The atmosphere in the house shifted as she gathered her belongings. Her departure left a void that everyone felt in different ways. Grace left the mansion quietly, carrying a feeling of confusion and deep sorrow. She walked away without fully understanding how Megan had turned Richard against her. She still cared for the twins, and leaving them behind was the hardest part. Noah and Ethan felt devastated as they watched her go. They hugged her tightly, trying to tell her how much she meant to them, but the situation could not be changed. They returned inside the house feeling empty and angry at the injustice. Richard felt conflicted, but Megan spoke reassuringly, telling him he had made the right choice. She used the moment to strengthen her role inside the home, presenting herself as someone who protected him and the children. Richard, emotionally tired, accepted her comfort without realizing how much control she now held. The house felt different without Grace's presence. She had been a steady figure for years, and now her absence left the twins without someone they trusted. Megan continued to act as if her guidance was necessary, taking advantage of the situation she created. Richard believed the problem was solved, but he did not see the harm that had already spread inside his family. Grace moved temporarily into Emily's home, and the transition felt emotional for both of them. Emily welcomed her with genuine gratitude, recognizing everything Grace had done for Noah and Ethan throughout the years. This support had been especially important during difficult moments, and Emily felt relieved to offer Grace a place to stay after the unfair situation she had experienced. Grace arrived with only a few belongings, still feeling confused about how things had changed so quickly. Emily understood her sadness and tried to make her feel safe in the new environment. Together they began adjusting to a simpler routine, different from the one Grace had at the mansion. Emily prepared a room for her and reassured her that she did not need to rush anything. Grace appreciated the kindness and tried to stay strong, even though she felt the loss of the life she had built in the mansion. Despite the pain, she found comfort in Emily's presence. Staying with someone who understood her made the transition easier. She reminded herself that this temporary home was a chance to rest and recover from everything that had happened. Emily treated her with respect, grateful for the stability Grace had given her children for so long. The two women began rebuilding their routines step by step. Their days were simple, but filled with cooperation. Emily and Grace shared household tasks, helping each other naturally without needing complicated plans. Grace cleaned, organized small areas, and helped with meals, while Emily handled other responsibilities with care. They found a balanced rhythm that made the house feel calm and comfortable. Even though the environment was much simpler than the mansion, the atmosphere felt peaceful. Grace appreciated being in a place where she could breathe and reflect. She and Emily often talked about Noah and Ethan, sharing thoughts about how the boys were adjusting and how they might be feeling after everything that happened. They contacted the twins whenever possible, sending messages and making short calls when the situation allowed. Hearing the children's voices lifted Grace's spirits and helped Emily feel closer to her sons. They both wished the boys could visit more often, but they understood that circumstances were complicated. Still, every moment of communication felt important. Being able to support each other helped them face the uncertainty ahead, and they continued guiding one another through this new stage in their lives. Meanwhile, Megan became even more present in Richard's daily routine. She positioned herself as someone essential in his life and tried to fill every space that once belonged to his family. She joined him more frequently at home, during meals, and even during moments that had once been private or quiet. Richard accepted this presence without questioning it, believing that Megan was simply helping him move forward. He was still affected by the emotional pressure of recent events, and Megan took advantage of this. Her influence grew stronger as she offered opinions about his schedule, his habits, and his decisions. Richard interpreted this as support, not realizing how deeply she was involving herself. The mansion began to feel entirely shaped by her presence. Spaces that once belonged to the twins or held memories of his previous family life slowly became centered around Megan. She stayed close to Richard at every opportunity, making sure she was the person he turned to the most. Her constant involvement made it hard for him to notice how much of the household atmosphere had shifted. Megan acted as though her role in his life was natural and necessary, and Richard, overwhelmed and tired, allowed this change without resisting. Emily observed everything from a distance. She heard pieces of information through the twins, and sometimes through simple comments Richard made during brief conversations. Although she was no longer part of his home, she could tell that he was becoming emotionally dependent on Megan. Emily recognized the signs of manipulation because she had lived with Richard long enough to understand how easily he could be influenced when he felt pressured or confused. She saw that he was too involved to notice any suspicious behavior. Emily did not interfere, knowing that Richard would not listen to her warnings. Still, she felt concerned. She remembered how Megan behaved during their first interactions, and she sensed that the situation was getting worse. Emily knew the twins felt uncomfortable around Megan, and she worried about what they might be experiencing. Even though she no longer shared a life with Richard, she still cared about the emotional health of her children and the environment they were exposed to. Watching from afar forced her to accept that she had limited control, but she continued paying attention. Her instincts told her that something deeper was happening, and she hoped that Richard would eventually see it for himself. Grace also carried heavy concerns, even though she no longer lived in the mansion. She thought about Noah and Ethan constantly, remembering their expressions during difficult moments and their sadness when she left. She worried about how they were being treated in the house now that Megan had gained more influence. Grace missed the routine she once had with the twins, helping them, talking with them, and supporting them when they needed comfort. Their bond had grown strong over the years, and it felt painful to be separated from them suddenly. She often talked to Emily about how the boys might be feeling, hoping they were safe and emotionally supported. Grace felt unsettled by the idea that Megan was shaping the household decisions more than before. Based on what she had witnessed, she believed that Megan's behavior toward the twins was not sincere. From a distance, she could not intervene, which made her worry even more. She wanted to help, but all she could do was remain available for Emily and wait for opportunities to support the boys whenever possible. Her sense of responsibility toward them did not disappear simply because she was removed from the mansion. Even while dealing with her own sadness, Grace held on to the affection she had developed for Noah and Ethan. She reminded herself daily that her concern for them was genuine, and that nothing Megan had accused her of was true. Grace found strength in knowing that the twins trusted her and defended her when everything happened. This gave her hope that the situation would eventually change. She also reflected on the influence Megan had over Richard. From the outside, it was easier to see how strongly Megan shaped his decisions, and Grace felt uneasy about how quickly things had shifted in the family. Living with Emily gave her the chance to rebuild her life slowly, but her thoughts often returned to the mansion and the children she cared for. She stayed in contact whenever possible and reassured the twins that she was still present in their lives, even if they could not see each other as often. Though she did not understand the full complexity of Megan's manipulation, Grace knew something was wrong. She continued hoping that in time, truth would come to light and that Richard would recognize the changes happening around him. Until then, she and Emily supported one another, waiting for better days. Grace returned to the mansion on a quiet afternoon, hoping to collect a few personal belongings she had left behind when she was dismissed. She chose a time when she knew Richard and Megan would not be home because she did not want any confrontation. When she arrived, she was greeted only by secondary staff members who did not ask many questions. They simply let her in, recognizing her from all the years she had worked there. Even though she walked through familiar hallways, everything felt different now. The house no longer carried the sense of routine and warmth she had once known. She moved quickly, wanting to avoid unnecessary attention. As she passed certain rooms, she remembered the moments she had shared with the twins and the stability the mansion had once represented. But now, her objective was simple: retrieve her things and leave quietly. She tried to stay focused, but a sense of discomfort followed her as she walked through the house. It was strange to return as a visitor instead of an employee. Still, she remained calm, thinking only about finishing what she came to do and getting back to Emily's house, where she felt safe and respected. As she made her way toward the area where she believed her belongings were stored, Grace walked past Richard's office. The door was slightly open, and inside she immediately noticed something unexpected. Megan's laptop was on the desk, still open, with the screen lit. It was unusual to see a device left unattended like that, especially considering how private Megan always acted. The sight caught Grace's attention, and although she had no intention of invading anyone's privacy, something in her memory triggered a sense of unease. She remembered the many strange behaviors she had witnessed in Megan, the uncomfortable tension she always felt, and the manipulative tone Megan used whenever Richard was present. These memories made her pause. A natural curiosity grew inside her, fueled by the deep doubts she had carried since her dismissal. She hesitated for a moment, torn between leaving immediately or taking a closer look. The open laptop seemed out of place, almost as if someone had walked away in a hurry. The thoughts weighed heavily on Grace, and she took a careful step inside the room, feeling conflicted but unable to ignore the instinct telling her that something important might be there. Grace approached the desk slowly, her hands slightly trembling. She leaned forward and looked at the screen more closely. The laptop displayed an email tab still logged in, with several messages visible. At first, she saw only subject lines, but then one particular message caught her eye. The words were alarming even before she opened the email fully. Driven by the growing sense of urgency inside her, Grace clicked on the message to read its content. As she began scanning the emails, her breath caught. The messages contained detailed conversations describing plans involving Richard and the twins. There were explanations, methods, and motivations tied to the family's fortune. Grace read references to eliminating them permanently, something she never imagined she would encounter. She continued reading, and each sentence felt more disturbing than the last. These were not simple threats or vague statements. They outlined intentional actions, clearly describing steps someone planned to take. Grace's heart raced as she tried to understand how something so terrible could be written so plainly. She felt a cold wave of disbelief and fear wash over her. The emails confirmed every suspicion she had ever felt toward Megan, but the truth was far worse than anything she had imagined. As Grace kept reading, she found messages that described a specific method meant to cause harm to the family. One email mentioned plans related to sabotaging the family's car. The details were written clearly, explaining how the sabotage could lead to a deadly accident. There was no doubt about the intention. The messages discussed the inheritance and the benefits that would come from Richard and the twins' deaths. Grace felt horrified. She read the lines again, hoping she had misunderstood something, but the meaning was unmistakable. The tone of the emails showed no hesitation, no second thoughts. Everything was written directly, as if planning such an act was a normal conversation. Grace felt her legs weaken as she realized the danger Richard and the boys were in. She remembered the twins' discomfort, Richard's emotional exhaustion, and how Megan had slowly isolated everyone who cared about them. The pieces connected in her mind with terrifying clarity. She felt completely overwhelmed, unable to believe that someone living so close to the family could be capable of such cruelty. Her pulse quickened as she stared at the screen, knowing she had discovered something extremely serious. Grace stepped back from the desk, her heart pounding fast, and tried to calm herself, but the fear only grew stronger. She realized that she could not stay in the room any longer. If Megan or Richard returned and found her there, things could turn dangerous very quickly. She glanced once more at the laptop, unable to forget the violent plans she had just read. Her mind raced through every moment she had witnessed in the mansion, remembering Megan's irritation towards the twins, the manipulative behavior, and the way she pushed Grace out of the house. Everything made sense now, but the realization was almost too heavy to bear. Grace felt trapped between shock and urgency. She needed to leave immediately, but her legs felt stiff. She forced herself to move, walking quickly out of the office, trying to keep her breath steady despite the panic forming inside her. She knew that what she had found was life-threatening information, and she had to warn someone. Every second felt important now. Without wasting any more time, Grace rushed toward the exit, hoping to get away before anyone returned. When Grace finally stepped outside the mansion, she felt a surge of desperation. The air felt heavy, and she struggled to process everything she had seen. She did not stop to talk to anyone or answer any questions from staff members. All she could think about was getting as far away as possible and finding a safe place to plan her next steps. Her mind replayed the emails over and over, the references to murder, the mention of the inheritance, and the specific plan to sabotage the car. The danger was real, immediate, and terrifying. Grace hurried across the property with her hands shaking, trying not to think about what could happen if she failed to act quickly. She felt responsible for protecting Richard and the twins, even though she had been pushed out of their lives. She reached the outside gate, still overwhelmed, unsure of how to handle the situation, but knowing she could not stay silent. Grace was filled with urgency, fear, and determination. What she had discovered was too serious to ignore, and she understood that her next decisions could mean the difference between life and death for the family she once cared for so deeply. Richard started his morning following the same routine he had practiced for years. He walked through the house collecting the boys' school materials, checking their notebooks, and making sure nothing important was missing. He picked up their backpacks from the living room and placed them on the table to confirm that everything was organized. Noah and Ethan stood nearby, waiting quietly while he finished the last details. Richard called their names gently, asking if they had homework that needed to be turned in, or if they remembered any announcements from school. He moved quickly because he knew his schedule for the day was full, and he did not want to arrive late. Even though he was busy, he tried to keep the morning calm for the twins. He tied one of their shoelaces, fixed a strap on a backpack, and checked the time repeatedly. The house felt tense, but the routine helped him focus. He told the boys to head toward the garage while he grabbed his keys. Everything looked normal, and Richard saw no sign that anything unusual was happening. To him, it was just another morning where he balanced his responsibilities as a father with the pressure of his work schedule. Noah and Ethan walked toward the car slowly, each carrying a backpack almost as big as their small shoulders. They knew the routine well, but they still felt uneasy. They did not understand exactly why the atmosphere in the house felt strange, but they sensed it anyway. When they reached the car, they waited for their father to unlock the doors. Richard approached with quick steps, still thinking about the time. He opened the back door and helped them climb into their seats. He reminded them to put on their seatbelts properly, checking each buckle to make sure it clicked into place. While doing this, he tried to start a light conversation about school, asking if they were ready for the day or if they had any activities they were looking forward to. The twins answered in short sentences, not feeling very talkative. Their minds were still affected by everything that had happened recently, especially the changes inside the house. Even so, they followed the morning routine without complaint. Richard closed the door gently, walked around to the driver's seat, and tried to stay focused on the simple process of getting his children safely to school. Inside the house, Megan stood near the doorway, watching the scene with a calm and distant expression. She did not speak, nor did she offer to help with the children or their things. Instead, she leaned slightly against the doorframe, maintaining a composed posture. Her eyes followed Richard's movements as he prepared the boys and checked the time. Megan appeared relaxed, but her stillness created an odd contrast with Richard's hurried pace. She made no attempt to interact with Noah or Ethan, who avoided looking in her direction. She simply observed everything without showing any clear emotion. Richard glanced at her briefly, almost out of habit, but he did not stop to talk. His mind was focused on leaving the house quickly, and he assumed Megan was simply waiting for him to finish his morning responsibilities. Her presence lingered in the background, not interfering, but not contributing either. This quiet behavior had become typical of her mornings. She watched the family routine from a distance, acting as if she had no involvement in the preparations. Even though the environment felt tense, nothing about the moment appeared dramatic or alarming to Richard. He saw only a morning like any other. Richard entered the driver's seat and closed the door, placing the keys in the ignition. He took a moment to adjust the mirrors, making sure he had a clear view of the road behind and around the car. He straightened the seat, checked the dashboard, and glanced at the time again. The boys sat silently in the back, waiting for him to start the drive. Richard asked them once more if they had everything they needed for school, and they both nodded. He tried to smile, wanting the morning to feel normal for them. He turned on the engine and listened to the steady sound of the car starting. He looked toward the house one last time, noticing Megan still standing there with the same quiet posture. Her expression did not change, and she did not raise her hand to wave. Richard did not think much of it and shifted his focus back to the road. He checked for approaching cars before preparing to pull out of the driveway. Everything about the morning looked ordinary to him. The routine steps, seatbelts, mirrors, engine helped him feel organized despite the heavy thoughts he carried from the days before. Noah and Ethan remained unusually quiet in the back seat. They sat side by side, backpacks resting on their laps, looking out the windows with distant expressions. The boys were still struggling to adapt to the changes in their family and the presence of Megan in the house. Even on a normal morning, they did not feel as relaxed as they used to. They answered their father politely when he spoke to them, but they kept most of their thoughts to themselves. They held onto their seatbelts with small, tense hands, wishing they could feel the same stability they once felt when Grace was still around. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but rather a sign of how cautious they had become. They looked forward to school because it was a place where things did not feel confusing. As they waited for the car to move, they focused on simple things: the window view, the sound of the engine, and the hope that the day would pass without complications. Their father tried to act calm, and they noticed his effort, even though they still felt the weight of the morning. The entire routine seemed ordinary. Nothing about the situation suggested danger or urgency. Richard believed he was simply doing what he always did, balancing the responsibilities of being a father with the demands of work. He saw the morning as just another part of his schedule, something he had repeated many times before. Everything looked normal from the outside. The boys were in the car, the backpacks were ready, and the road ahead seemed clear. Megan's distant presence appeared harmless. The garage felt familiar, the driveway quiet, and the timing manageable. Richard was prepared to start driving, thinking about his next meeting and the tasks waiting for him after dropping off the twins. There were no signs to warn him that anything was wrong. The calmness of the moment felt natural, as if the day would unfold like any other. The routine, though simple, gave him comfort. He did not sense that anything unusual was happening in the background. For him, it was just another morning, shaped by habit and responsibility, without any indication of the danger that Grace had discovered far away from the mansion. Grace arrived at the mansion running, completely out of breath, her heart pounding from fear and urgency. She did not stop to greet anyone or explain why she was there. The only thing in her mind was reaching Richard before he drove away with the twins. As she approached the driveway, she saw the car slowly preparing to move, and panic pushed her to run even faster. She moved directly toward the vehicle and placed herself beside it, waving her arms and yelling loudly for Richard to stop. Her voice carried desperation, and she did not care how sudden or alarming it sounded. She shouted his name again, trying to get his attention before he pulled out of the driveway. Richard looked confused at the sight of her and immediately reacted by stepping out of the car. Grace, still catching her breath, tried to speak as clearly as possible despite her panic. She explained that something was dangerously wrong with the vehicle, insisting that he must not drive it under any circumstances. Her urgency created a sudden tension in the quiet morning. breaking the ordinary routine they had been following only moments earlier. Everyone nearby turned their attention toward her unexpected arrival. Richard stepped out of the car with a stunned expression. He did not understand why Grace had appeared so suddenly, or why she was shouting with such urgency. At first, he thought there had been some misunderstanding or confusion, but the fear in Grace's voice made it impossible to ignore her warning. She insisted that the brakes had been cut, referencing the messages she had found earlier. Richard felt a mixture of disbelief and concern. He asked her to explain, but Grace urged him to check the vehicle immediately instead of wasting time with long conversations. Her insistence frightened him, and he hurried around to the driver's side, opening the door again. He sat down just long enough to test the brake pedal with his foot. When he pressed it, there was no resistance at all. The pedal dropped to the floor with ease, offering no pressure. Richard froze, staring forward in shock. The reality hit him suddenly, and he stepped back from the car with wide eyes. The truth was now undeniable. Grace had not come running for nothing. The situation was far more serious than he had imagined just moments earlier. Megan stood at a distance near the entrance of the house. She watched the entire scene unfold without moving closer or showing concern. Her posture remained stiff, and her expression did not change even as Richard tested the brakes and discovered that something was wrong. She did not speak or ask questions. Instead, she stayed where she was, almost detached from the chaos happening right in front of her. Her presence felt strange, especially in a moment that should have caused alarm or confusion in anyone else. Richard glanced briefly in her direction, expecting some reaction, but she remained still. Her reaction made Grace feel even more certain that the situation was connected to what she had read earlier. The emotional distance Megan maintained set her apart from everyone else, who were clearly affected by the sudden shift in atmosphere. Richard, still processing everything, could not understand why Megan showed no sign of surprise. Her attitude added another layer of tension to the situation, making the moment feel heavy and unsettling. She continued watching silently, adding to the confusion growing among the others present. Inside the car, Noah and Ethan were confused and frightened. They had been prepared for a normal ride to school only a few minutes earlier, but now everything felt chaotic and unpredictable. When Grace shouted and Richard got out so quickly, the boys looked at each other with wide, uncertain eyes. They did not understand what was happening, but the urgency in Grace's voice and the shock on their father's face made them feel scared. They stayed seated, holding their backpacks close to their chests, unsure whether they should get out of the car or wait. When they saw Richard press the brake pedal and react in disbelief, their fear increased. They sensed that something dangerous had been avoided at the last second. The change from a calm morning to a tense and frightening moment happened so fast that they felt overwhelmed. They could not fully process the situation, but they knew something very serious had just occurred. For them, the moment felt heavy and confusing, and they waited anxiously for someone to tell them what to do next. Richard stepped away from the car with shaking hands, trying to understand the magnitude of what he had just discovered. Realizing the brakes had truly been cut filled him with shock, fear, and a sense of betrayal he could barely describe. He thought about how close he had been to driving away with the twins, unaware of the danger he was placing them in. The idea of what could have happened hit him hard, almost too heavy to process. He looked at the vehicle, then at Grace, trying to connect everything she had said with what he had just confirmed. His voice was unsteady as he asked Grace how she knew, but she simply repeated that she had seen messages that described a plan involving the car. Her urgency and panic now made complete sense. Richard realized that he owed her more than a simple acknowledgement. She had likely saved their lives. The fear inside him grew stronger as he replayed the moment he had started the engine. The shock of the discovery settled into him, making it impossible to ignore the seriousness of the situation. The scene outside the mansion grew tense. Grace stood near the car, still breathing heavily and emotionally shaken. Richard tried to regain control of his thoughts, struggling to understand how close they had come to disaster. The twins watched everything from the back seat, frightened and silent. Megan remained distant, her expression still rigid and unreadable. No one spoke for several seconds, and the silence felt heavy and uncomfortable. The atmosphere was filled with fear, confusion, and suspicion. Richard knew the situation required immediate attention, but he also felt overwhelmed by the suddenness of it all. What had started as a normal morning had turned into a moment that revealed a dangerous truth. The simple act of taking the children to school had nearly become something far worse. As the tension lingered in the air, everyone present understood that nothing about the situation was ordinary anymore. The household, once dominated by routine, now stood on the edge of a crisis that none of them had expected to face that day. Richard acted quickly after discovering the danger. His hands were still shaking, but he forced himself to stay focused. He took out his phone and contacted the authorities immediately, explaining everything he had found out in a rushed and tense voice. He told them about the brake failure, Grace's warning, and the urgent need for investigation. The operator instructed him to stay where he was and wait for officers to arrive. Within a short time, police vehicles reached the mansion, filling the driveway with flashing lights and uniformed agents. Richard cooperated fully, guiding them to the car and repeating the details he knew. Grace stayed close to the twins while the officers examined the vehicle. The agents inspected the brake system and confirmed that the lines had been deliberately cut. Their confirmation made the situation even more real for everyone standing there. What had almost happened became clearer with each word the officers spoke. Richard felt a mix of shock, anger, and relief. The professionals continued taking photographs, collecting samples, and documenting everything. The calm morning routine had completely transformed into a scene filled with investigation and serious questions. While some officers focused on the car, others began searching the house for additional evidence. They asked Richard where Megan was, and he pointed toward the area where she'd been standing earlier. The agents approached her and asked her to remain still as they questioned her. They acted with caution and seriousness, knowing the situation involved attempted harm. Megan responded with short, controlled answers, but the officers continued pressing for details. Not long after, they received confirmation from the team inside the house. They had found messages and files that supported the accusations Grace had reported. Based on this information, the officers informed Megan that she would be taken into custody. She did not resist visibly, but her expression remained stiff and distant. Richard watched the scene in disbelief, struggling to accept that someone he trusted had planned something so dangerous. The officers placed her in a patrol car and continued gathering evidence. The environment around the mansion felt heavy, filled with tension and confusion. What had once been a quiet morning now carried the weight of a criminal investigation, leaving everyone shaken. Emily arrived soon after being informed about what had happened. She rushed through the entrance with a worried expression, trying to find Richard and the children. When she finally saw Richard standing near the driveway, surrounded by officers, she felt a mixture of fear and relief. She approached him quickly, and he immediately apologized, speaking with sincerity. He explained how sorry he was for not seeing the manipulation earlier and for the danger that had come so close to their family. Emily listened carefully, recognizing the regret in his voice. She reassured him that the most important thing was that he and the twins were safe. Their conversation was emotional, but it also brought a sense of understanding between them. They both knew that the situation had been complicated and that things had escalated beyond anything they could have predicted. Emily's presence helped bring some calm to the moment. She asked about the twins, and Richard guided her toward them. The tension between them softened as they focused on their children's safety, temporarily setting aside past conflicts. Noah and Ethan ran to their mother as soon as they saw her. Their faces showed clear relief and emotion. They hugged her tightly, holding on to the sense of safety she always brought them. Emily crouched down to reassure them, checking if they were hurt or scared. Grace stood beside them, offering support in her gentle way. The twins also embraced Grace without hesitation, showing how much they trusted and appreciated her. They told their mother how Grace had helped save them and how she had warned their father in time. Emily looked at Grace with gratitude, understanding the importance of her actions and the danger she had prevented. The children finally started to relax, knowing that the immediate threat was gone. They stayed close to their mother and to Grace, finding comfort in the two people who had been constants in their lives. Even in the middle of the investigation, their reunion created a small moment of relief. The officers continued working around them, but for the twins, being near Emily and Grace was enough to ease the fear they had felt earlier. Grace received sincere thanks from Richard and Emily. Richard told her how grateful he was for her courage and quick reaction. Emily repeated the same appreciation, understanding that Grace had acted selflessly to protect the family. Grace felt emotional as she listened to their words. She had gone through confusion, fear, and injustice, but now she finally saw that her efforts had made a difference. The authorities also asked her for details about the messages she had found. Grace explained everything clearly, describing the emails and how she had discovered them accidentally. Her statements became part of the official record. The house remained busy with activity as officers continued collecting information. Everyone involved felt emotionally drained, but they stayed cooperative, wanting to make sure the truth was fully uncovered. Grace remained with the family, offering support to the twins, while helping clarify anything the officers needed from her. Although the day had been overwhelming, she felt some relief knowing she had prevented a tragedy. Hours passed as the officers conducted interviews, reviewed evidence, and spoke with each family member. The mansion, once filled with noise and tension, slowly began to calm down as the investigation reached its main conclusions. When the authorities finally left, the family gathered inside the house to process everything they had been through. Richard sat with Emily, the twins, and Grace, reflecting on how drastically the day had changed their lives. They discussed what had happened, trying to understand the sequence of events and the danger they had narrowly escaped. The emotions ranged from fear to relief, but also gratitude. They recognized that despite the chaos, they were still together and safe. The reunion brought a sense of unity that had been missing for a long time. The day had tested all of them, but it also reminded them of the importance of protecting one another. As they sat together, the overwhelming events slowly settled, leaving them with a mixture of exhaustion and hope for a calmer future. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.